Welcome to Money Talks. I'm Genevieve Westcott with your latest financial news from across New Zealand and around the globe. In this edition, Christchurch comeback 1 year on, the earthquake, the economy, and the conundrum about how to rebuild a crucial community. It ain't over yet. The government admits it got it wrong. It's not going to be back to a balanced budget quite as soon as it's been telling us. And just how much will the taxpayers pocket if we sell off our state-owned assets? The dollars keep changing, depending on who you talk to in the national government. February 22nd, 1 year ago today, the massive Christchurch quake rocked our country and our economy. The aftershocks are still strong and ongoing. Joining us today is BNZ's Chief Economist, Tony Alexander, and a former BNZ Chief Economist turned Director of Financial Focus, Murray Weatherston. Gentlemen, where were you on the day of the big quake? We'll start with you, Tony.
Yeah, I was actually at home getting the suit on, ready to hop in the car, drive to the airport and in fact fly down to Christchurch where I was due to give some talks, one of which would have been about 24 hours later in the Grand Chancellor building, in fact. So if the earthquake had been exactly 24 hours later, would have been in that building at the time.
You're actually a Canterbury boy, born and bred.
Oh, born and bred down there, Canterbury University for 5 years. So yeah, got obviously a fairly close link there. My entire family is still down there. Bulk of my wife's family is still down there as well. So, you know, like everybody else, still got a fairly close connection in some regards down there to the place.
Murray, what are your recollections of that day a year ago now?
My recollection, I think, is that I was in my office. I was probably preparing to go for lunch, and I saw the flash on the computer screen that said there'd been a big earthquake in Christchurch, and probably for the next 24 hours I probably sat glued to the television and radio and the computer, you know, trying to find out exactly what had happened.
If you had to grade how the government has done in handling the rebuild, what would you give them 1 year on?
Well, actually, I think they're on a hiding to nothing. They come in the first instance, you know, almost, but not quite, promising that they can sort everything out very quickly. But basically, it's going to be a much, much longer job than they ever thought at the beginning. I think they're probably on a hiding to nothing, and I think their spin will probably be try to blame everybody else for why things aren't happening fast enough. You know, they want things to happen faster, but it's all somebody else's fault.
Tony, what's your take on how big a drag this has been on the entire New Zealand economy?
Yeah, the interesting thing there is that because the Christchurch manufacturing sector wasn't all that badly affected, the shaking areas were more in the suburbs as opposed to the industrial zone, that very important sector wasn't grossly interrupted. Tourism, of course, has had a fairly strong impact there, but many people diverted elsewhere. So the overall impact on the economy, definitely a negative for now. Later on it'll be a positive with the rebuild, but not as devastating, I think, as could have been the case as if the manufacturing had been severely affected.
But the question is, when are we going to get to the rebuild?
Well, this is the difficult thing. I mean, what I've been saying to people around the country, and also in London, I get across there about every 6 months or so, and I speak to a lot of Kiwis over there, very strong sentiment for supporting Christchurch, etc. There's a high awareness that you need the quakes to stop, but because we're getting these strong aftershocks every 4 to 6 months, the insurers, of course, just back away a bit further. More buildings are found that they've got to be pulled down. People don't know exactly when the end game is, as it were, for the destruction before the construction can start. And so us economists, for the past year, we've just been pushing out every 3 months our forecast of the rebuild by another 3 months, to the point now where we're into early 2013, hopefully, when it gets going.
Talking about forecasts, the government, of course, now, as we know, has said that they were far too ambitious. It's not going to, the growth is not going to be there that they have predicted. Right. Any surprises there?
No, not at all. Basically, their latest forecasts have reduced the growth for this year and next year by about 1% in total, I think it is, and they've pushed up growth in the following year, or they've pushed growth out in the following year up by 0.5%. So over this and the next 2 years, they're down about minus 0.5%. Not a surprise at all. I mean, I think Tony's probably pretty optimistic, thinking that construction in Canterbury is going to be underway to that level. You know, I think it's a decade's problem before it really gets underway.
So how's that going to realistically, for the next 10 years, affect Auckland, Dunedin, every other city in the country?
Well, I don't think it affects them at all, really. I think the big impact is in Christchurch, where, in a sense, everybody's sitting on their hands. I mean, I personally think the lucky people are those who, if anybody was lucky out of it, were the people who were red stickered, because at least you can move on. You can get your money and go.
Well, apparently not. The big problem, according to Jerry Brownlee, the minister who I heard talking on television last night, he says it's the problem isn't with the government, it's the insurers, that they are too slow to pay out people. Does this make sense to you? Is the government just looking to pass the buck?
Well, I think everybody's in a slightly invidious position here, in that A, that the earthquakes are continuing in some regard, and B, that makes the insurers obviously wary about writing new contracts. In terms of the payouts, I definitely think things could have been accelerated a lot more there, and it's a common complaint I've been hearing for practically the past year now, that the amount paid out has been relatively low. People want to get on with their lives, and so yeah, I definitely think some acceleration in the payouts would be an extremely useful thing, frankly.
How do you think overall the New Zealand economy is doing? Reasonably
okay under the circumstances. Certainly things aren't very flash. We're running a bit faster than stall speed, I guess, but in per capita terms, GDP is hardly moving. So the economy is pretty much, stall speed's the best explanation I can give for it.
The government now says it doesn't know how much money it's really going to get if it sells off some of the state-owned assets. Could be $6 billion, according to the finance minister. John Key says, hey, we really don't know. This doesn't make me feel very secure about the boys in charge. How about you?
Yeah, well, I agree in that you can't know exactly what an asset is going to sell for ahead of time. For me, the bigger issue is the problems for the New Zealand economy don't come down to government ownership of assets. It's more the entrepreneurship out there. It's more the impediments from the Resource Management Act, the government bureaucracy generally. I do not for a second believe that selling off partial holdings in these assets will drive productivity growth forward in the New Zealand economy.
So why are they doing it?
Yeah, why are they doing it, especially when you're going to sacrifice dividends to a greater extent than you're going to make up by paying debt on the other side? I think there's probably an ideological drive which is coming in behind it, the idea that you should have a relatively small government. So it's consistent with their shrinking of the public sector, but that's just a Labor, national government sort of change around that we've got here. And I guess for me the biggest problem is this, as a Prime Minister, this is not where I would be investing my political capital. Having won the election, you've obviously got a lot of goodwill from people, but to put it into an asset sale process which clearly does not have popular support takes your mind away from other things. It's not what I'd do.
And I ask you, how much public support does he really have? We've seen this, of course, with the Crafer Farm sell-off, the shock stop of the sale to the Chinese. Murray, it seems as if a lot of New Zealanders don't like it. Latest polls show that they don't want foreign ownership of land and other assets. This is a real problem for the government.
But I've said on this program before, I just think that's xenophobia. I've always thought there's a difference between capital or assets that are in place in New Zealand and can't shift out of New Zealand. So whoever owns the farmland will always be in New Zealand. It's not like there's been a factory that's got intellectual property and all the rest of it where they stakes the factory, take all the manufacturing away, take all the employment away, all that. I think that's a different kettle of fish. Personally, I don't think it matters who owns the farmland, and it's just really a nationalistic, xenophobic sort of argument.
Would it matter to you who got the farms?
Not to me.
Sir Michael Fay, the Chinese, Alan Crafer getting it back, you don't care?
I don't care. Basically the farmland will still stay in New Zealand. You can't take it up and shift it offshore. The farms will still be here.
Thank you, Murray. Coming up after the break, the European Union continues to drive a hard bargain with Greece. And with China now our second most important export market, it won't be long before it overtakes Australia as our largest source of export income. How can we best profit from the sleeping giant? Tips from the BNZ. But first, answer this in our Farmers' Facts and Figures quiz. The International Monetary Fund has slashed its 2012 growth forecast for China. Question: what's the new IMF growth forecast for the giant Asian nation? The answer when we return. See you soon. Welcome back to Money Talks. Just before the break, we asked you, what's the new IMF growth forecast for China? According to the IMF, China's growth for 2012 will fall from 9% to 8.25%. Should we be worried about that, Tony?
No, this isn't the big issue for New Zealand, whether China grows 10%, 9% or 8%. The issue more is to what extent are we exploiting the free trade agreement that sits in place there? To what extent do New Zealand businesses, especially small, medium-sized enterprises, recognise the changes in China, the growing middle class, and the fact they're going to be wanting to consume the sort of things that we consume around us every day? Are we slotting enough in there?
I want to talk to you a bit more about China because you focused new publications on that to help business people, which is great. But I'm wondering, Murray, what do you think the Chinese people are thinking as they sit back and watch this debacle over the sale of the Crayford farms? Is this potentially going to hurt us?
I'd be very surprised. At the political level, I'm sure there's people running around wondering what that should happen. I suspect the average Chinese couldn't care less.
Certainly not, I think, the average Chinese person, but the investors over there who are looking at some sort of linkage with New Zealand, the feedback we've had so far is that they're putting some things on hold. They really want to see where this goes. They've noticed that there weren't court cases for other buyers of land in New Zealand, your Germans, your Irish, etc., but suddenly there is for this Chinese purchase, and that's just made them a bit wary, and they've started to think, so is this what a free trade agreement brings? As one of our senior politicians said, we were either going to have the first free trade agreement with China or the last one. And for them, this is a bit of an experience, a learning process. So I think they will be watching closely to see how an FTA actually plays out in practice here.
But the obvious retort to that is, can I go to China and buy land?
But
no, you can't, but you could lease it for a heck of a long time.
Yeah, but I can't buy it.
No, that's right, but I don't think we should apply the laws of China to Chinese people when they come to New Zealand as regards environmental protection.
You're really targeting at the BNZ now, Chinese money, aren't you? You put out a new publication. Tell me about that, to help business people here.
Yeah, it's not so much targeting Chinese money in terms of encouraging investment into New Zealand. That's not the idea. It's more that we've had such massive growth in the Chinese economy in recent years, and New Zealand's exports to China have gone from 7% of our receipts 3.5 years ago to 14%. And I think it's caught a lot of us unawares. You know, even myself a year ago, I was thinking in terms of, well, lots of them, they're getting wealthier, they've got to eat, they need our milk powder. Well, that's us done for the next century or so. We can sit back and relax. Not the case at all, because there are many other suppliers of basic commodities. The Irish are extremely interested with their little herds of 9 cows apiece, you know, in getting their products into China, etc. We have to move up the value chain. And the simplest example there is infant formula. We're making good money down on the farm there in Fonterra, etc., from raising the milk powder and selling that off. But the big returns are in selling these very expensive cans of infant formula, not going to kill your baby, you know, nice and safe, across in China. And so we need the investment that's happening in New Zealand, all this money that goes down on the farm, boosting grass growth. No. Every single dollar of that needs to go into building infant formula factories. And that is the big investment frontier in New Zealand, which smaller operators are moving into. I'm aware of at least 6 operations getting underway at the moment. And that's where we need Fonterra, our existing other large operators, to hoe in there.
From your report, one of the staggering statistics that I picked up, and let me lay it on Murray, export receipts from China have grown 151% in the last 3 years, from 2.3 billion to 5.9 billion.
It's not going to be very long before China becomes our biggest export market. It's so much bigger and it's growing so much faster that it's going to overtake Australia, pretty soon.
I'll tell you what, I think if I was the Greek Prime Minister, I'd be sending a study group to China right now to find out how they've got that phenomenal growth. So let's talk a little bit about the Greek situation. The deal has been done 14 hours with the Eurozone finance ministers. They are going to loan the money for the next bailout to Greece. Is it going to save Greece? No.
Basically, all it does is give them some money to pay back the other money that they've already borrowed. There's a bit of a sweetener in it from the Greek perspective, because the private sector is taking a haircut on the on the money that they've already lent them.
Over 53%.
That's right. And so if you lend $100 million to the Greek government, you're going to get back $47.5 million. I think it's something like $15 million now. And the other bit, you've got to lend them for 30 years at 3% for a period of time, and then it goes to 3.75%. But the Greek economy doesn't get really anything out of that deal other than their creditors aren't going to put them into bankruptcy tomorrow.
And the problem is, of course, it's not the politicians, it's the people. The people aren't happy. I mean, socially, this is a country on its knees. Are the people going to go along with it? I mean, they've got 1 week to deliver up some of the severe cuts. And the other thing about the latest deal, now they're going to be monitored. European monitors are going to be sitting there looking over the Greek government shoulders saying, cut there, cut there, cut there. This is insane, isn't it?
Well, they're on a hiding to nothing. I mean, the Treaty of Rome from your 1950s there, the idea was all these European countries join together, stop rolling tanks across each other's borders, etc. And your likes of your Germans, your French, they aggressively encouraged economies, countries like Greece, to join in there, and especially join in the euro. We're all moving forward. It's going to be great and fantastic. We'll all move together. Now, they don't want to have that experiment, as it were, fail. They really do not want Greece to leave. But in trying to keep them within the Eurozone and within the European Union, the cost they're imposing socially is absolutely massive. And when I've been visiting Brussels and speaking with some of the people involved in this over the past couple of years, that seriously is what they're focusing on. To what extent will suddenly the voters change and go for the extremities? Either extreme left or extreme right, there's a risk that you get these rogue political outcomes. And in the end, and looking at this from outside, it's like the ultimate outcome is they simply default, they leave the euro, they recreate themselves as a low-wage economy and build from there. But the legal mechanism simply doesn't exist to allow them to leave the euro in the first place. And the Germans are going to have to pay up. That's it.
Where are the bright spots in the world right now? Give us some good news, Murray. The U.S. is looking a little bit stronger.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess anybody that's not in recession at this point in time is actually pretty good. China is still cracking along at a pretty good pace. Asia still going along at a pretty good pace, but Europe is slower than stall speed probably. We're stall speed. Australia is doing well in part of the economy. The mining sector's still booming away, mostly drawn by the Chinese, what they want to buy from Australia. The rest of the economy isn't doing actually too well. It really is pretty much of a grim position at the moment, actually. There aren't too many bright spots around.
Thanks, Murray. Coming up after the break, future proof on the highways and byways of the economic world as our experts point out what's coming up. But first, answer this in our Farmers Facts and Figures quiz, and it's all about rugby. How much did last year's Rugby World Cup boost tourism spending in New Zealand? The latest results from the Ministry of Economic Development. Put on your thinking caps now. Catch you soon. Welcome back to Money Talks. Just before the break, we asked you, how much did last year's Rugby World Cup boost tourism spending in New Zealand? Visitors here spent about $390 million, stronger than forecast. Overall spending by international visitors last year was up by $168 million to $5.8 billion. Excluding international airfares. Do you believe those figures, Tony, or are you a little bit skeptical?
Well, you always have to be a wee bit dubious, I think, when you've got these special events coming along. What was the certainty of the surveys that were done, etc.? My view would be that if it was such a fantastic boost to the economy, we would have seen stronger growth in job numbers late last year than just the 0.2% in the December quarter and 0.2% also in the September quarter. It's, I think, a relatively small boost to the economy.
What do you really worry about for the economy in this coming year? Where are the real soft spots that keep you up at night, if anything does?
Yeah, it's not so much something domestically. Obviously, the timing of the Christchurch rebuild, that's more a thing to come along, but we're not sure when. It would definitely be sourced from, I think, overseas. There is still the risk that things could go phenomenally bad in Europe. In the United States, I worry about their fiscal deficit attack, which is only just starting to get underway, and that the markets, even if Europe settles down, will then turn their attention to, hang on, who is the biggest debtor in the world? It's the United States. Maybe some pressure goes on them, and all of a sudden the US dollar's plummeting away, the bond yields are rising, the share market has a shock. So it's overseas source that I look for that weakness.
Interesting, in the US, I see that there is a lot of new building coming on stream, first time in many years, but it's for apartments, not houses. People are really playing it safe. Are we going to see that here?
Well, I think there's a big difference in the American housing market than ours, that they overbuilt a lot. And there's a lot of properties in the States that have been completed, they're sitting there, they've never been occupied, and somebody is going to buy them at some stage. And it's a bit like if we're a baked bean manufacturer and we'd manufactured too much last year, and at the start of the year we had a year's supply of baked beans on the shelf. What do you think would happen to the price of baked beans in that environment? That's the American experience, I think. And my reading of the New Zealand housing market is we're probably maybe a tad short of supply. We're only building 12,000 new houses a year. We need 20,000 new houses a year. You don't drive around places like Auckland and see lots of houses completed and unoccupied. So I think we're pretty much in an equilibrium supply demand situation. Maybe I think we're probably a bit short of supply, but in that context I can't see house prices dropping anytime soon.
Let's talk global commodity prices, Tony. Beef and sheep market doing very well here. Thank you very much. Dairy, of course, pretty ecstatic. What else is happening out there?
Yeah, most of all, I think what you've got is an economy which people are seeing, growing at an acceptable pace, maybe overseas. So that gives some support for the commodity prices. But really, the bigger story is that growth in the Chinese middle class there, other Asian economies growing, and people moving towards the protein consumption, more food, better food, etc., and giving a massive underpinning at the moment to the commodity prices, but also people wanting to invest and get exposure, of course, to those commodities over the long term. Hence the huge foreign interest in purchasing New Zealand land, etc. So yeah, good support for the wool, the sheep meat, the beef, the dairy, kiwi fruit. Of course, obviously the big problem there is the PSA. So it doesn't matter what's happening in the world environment. Apples, that's always interesting from season to season, and when I'm looking at videos of huge apple orchards being put up over in China, for instance, just makes me a wee bit concerned about some of the long-term prospects for the apple industry, shall we say, in New Zealand.
Can we also talk about the New Zealand dollar? It continues to rocket up and up and up. What's it at now, 83, 84? Yeah,
almost 84 cents against the greenback there, near, again, a 3-decade high against the pound and record high against the euro. And yet we're also very low against the Australian currency. And what you've got is quite a structural shift happening here. Where we used to send our exports, our commodities across to Europe, etc., structural change in the Kiwi dollar higher. When it comes to Australia, structural reduction in the Kiwi dollar because the Aussie dollar is so strong on commodity prices for minerals, etc. It means an opportunity to move some businesses out of Australia into New Zealand. That's what I'll be having a look at the moment. And of course, it increases the attractiveness for commodity exporters of looking at Asia generally, already taking 62% of our exports, whereas that other slow growth, weak currency, increasing protectionism part of the world, it's changing. Now, the risk is here, I think the Kiwi dollar remains strong. People like the look of New Zealand. They like the look of the way we've got through the global crisis in acceptable fashion. They like our primary commodity export makeup. The risk is the Kiwi dollar remains strong, but not so much against the Aussie currency.
And are we going to see the rise of the redback? You suggest that China's soon going to be trading in its own currency. That's something that New Zealand business people have to be aware of.
That's right. New Zealand businesses exporting to China, for the moment, they're probably trading in US dollars, and the same with anybody else that's trading with China. Well, they've already moved in the past 2 to 3 years from about 1 to 2% of China's trade in their own currency. Now it's getting towards 10%. That process clearly is going to continue as they get the systems, the processes in place to run sort of modern financial markets, as it were, not an option of a few years ago. So increasingly, people need to be thinking about their RMB denominated accounts for trading, investment, dividend flows, etc. with China, and of course that's where we banks are looking to occupy that space. Obviously, providers, we always have those facilities for financing trade with other countries.
The last word goes to you, Murray. Interest rates. Anything our farmers need to know?
I think they're pretty low for a reasonable period ahead. There doesn't seem to me to be any signs that they're about to rise soon.
Having had this discussion today, gentlemen, I can't help but think no sleeping in your soup allowed. Lots going on in the world, and you really got to keep up. Thank you so much. Thanks to my guests, B&Z Chief Economist Tony Alexander and Director of Financial Focus, Murray Weatherston. Be sure to check out our website. Meantime, we'll leave you with messages of hope from the kids of Whenuapai School, northwest of Auckland, for the kids of Christchurch. If children are our best hope for the future, we're in capable and caring hands.
I'd just like to say to all those people who have lost loved ones in Christchurch that they should just stay strong and keep on fighting.
My love goes out to all the people who have lost loved ones and those who are injured.
We're thinking of you guys.
I wish you all the best and I hope things get normalish soon.
But I just want to say to all the kids in Christchurch that we're all hoping for the best.
We hope that Christchurch will be okay.
Keep on going and we believe in you.
I'm sorry about the earthquake.
Stand up to the chances. You can be brave and get out there and make the world proud.
My grandma was down there once, so hope you guys get well down there and keep safe.
Good luck to my mum and my brother and sisters.
We love you, Christchurch.
Keep on going, you'll get through it.
We're
Keep the faith. See you next time.